Well, and one of the other things to think about too is voting equipment is an extremely, extremely expensive undertaking and something that most election authorities can only do once a decade if they are lucky.
The full and free exercise of our sacred right and duty to vote is more important in the long run than the personal hopes or ambitions of any candidate for any office in the land.
You're listening to High Turnout, Wide Margins, an insider's look at election administration hosted by Brianna Lennon and Eric Fay.
Hey everyone, this is Eric Fay with my co-host Brianna Lennon. In this episode, we're delving into the world of voting equipment acquisition and the providers of voting equipment and voting technology. And I would say this aspect of election administration is very crucial for election administrators, and it's something that's somewhat uniquely American in that we have this plethora of local election jurisdictions, and almost all of them need to figure out a way to acquire technology in order to tabulate their ballots. Because unlike places like Canada and France and Italy, other kind of quote unquote Western style democracies where ballots are mostly hand counted, hand tabulated, in the United States we have very long ballots with many contests and races with overlapping jurisdictions and precincts, and so technology becomes a requirement almost to make that an efficient process to get an initial tabulation of votes. So there are some minimal federal requirements promulgated by the Help America Vote Act, the voluntary voting system guidelines, and those are administered by the Election Assistance Commission. And many states, probably most states, require that voting technology used in each state, in that state, meets these federal requirements. Some states have more stringent requirements or some additional testing or certification requirements. Some states have less. But in any case, states and counties and cities and local jurisdictions rely on private companies to provide this voting equipment.
The process is not incredibly well known to people because it's such an administrative part of the job. In a lot of cases, when we're going to buy elections equipment, it's similar to when we have to go bid out paper or bid out envelopes. It's just a much higher scale of things, and there's a lot more scrutiny involved. So just as an example, and one of the other things to think about too is voting equipment is an extremely, extremely expensive undertaking and something that most election authorities can only do once a decade if they are lucky. And it's still a relatively, in the span of elections administration, the first real purchases of the electronic voting equipment that we use happened in 2005, 2006, when there was a lot of federal grant money infused into the process to upgrade voting equipment. And a lot of local election authorities, up until the last couple of years, were still using that equipment that they originally purchased in 2006. So we're now on kind of the second round for a lot of people, especially smaller jurisdictions that don't have a huge county budget. And I would include myself in that. We bought our new equipment in 2019. I guess the other thing that I like to point out about voting equipment acquisition is that it doesn't just end when you've bought the equipment. You don't just buy the equipment and then say, okay, I have it. It's great. Let's run elections on it. There's still testing that happens before every election. There's ongoing maintenance that has to be done. There's, parts of it that you learn that you love and parts of it that you learn that you don't like, and you have to train poll workers on it, and it's a very involved thing. So equipment becomes a very integral part of your elections process, regardless of what kind you use.
But all that being said, I think what's most interesting about this process is that there are these private companies behind all this voting equipment, and it's a for-profit business. And so election administrators try their best to get the best deal for the tax money that they're spending and to try to understand what they're getting. This is Eric Fay, Director of Elections in St. Louis County, Missouri. This is another exciting episode of High Turnout, Wide Margins. We're at the Election Center Annual Conference in Denver, and I'm with my co-host,
Brianna Lennon,
and our guest,
Peter Lichtenheld.
So this is, I think, the first time we've interviewed somebody who is in the business of the election business. So tell us what you do, and first, how you got into this role and how you got into elections.
Sure thing. So I was a teacher. I taught for 19 years in Austin, Texas in the public school system. And we did an election in 2000, rolling up to the 2000 general election. We did an election for the school mascot. And somebody at the school had a relation that worked at Hart InterCivic, and they had a new voting system coming out, and the first election they ever ran with that voting system was for the kiddos at the school to vote on the school mascot. And I took my kiddos down and they did that, and I said, that's pretty cool. And soon after, I called somebody at the company and said, hey, I'm interested in interviewing for a job there. I interviewed for a job that ended up not being on the voting system side. Wasn't really excited about it. I didn't get a job offer. And then I interviewed for a job on the voting system side. I did get a job offer, and I was very excited about the job and became a trainer with one employee. And I've been at Hart for 21 years since. Nowadays, what I do for Hart InterCivic is I'm the senior vice president, customer success, like I said. And I tell people, look, the job's kind of easy because it's easy to tell people what I do, because what I do is in my title. I'm in charge of keeping customers happy. Not that that's always easy, but easy to explain what I do. That's my job, is to help my team keep customers happy and help customers have successful elections.
Well, one thing I was hoping to accomplish with this interview, and I guess first I should say, for full disclosure, St. Louis County, where I am employed, is a customer of Hart InterCivic.
Boone County is not.
And Boone County is not. So just want to, I feel like that's a journalistic, disclosure thing. Yeah. So anyway, I think more so than talking about Hart in particular, we were hoping to talk about kind of the election business, because these various companies that make election equipment or develop software that election administrators use have been kind of thrust into the limelight after 2000. And I was hoping maybe you would talk from kind of a corporate perspective. How do you prepare for those things? How do you interact with your customers to deal with those kind of issues? Maybe start there. That's kind of what I was hoping to talk about.
Sure, that's great. And I won't advertise, so I'll try not to. So from the business perspective, I guess I would call it, of elections, it is a business. That's what we've decided in America, that a private sector would help us provide the technology to run elections. I always like to say, look, the first person really in America who tried to sell a voting system was Thomas Edison. By the way, he wasn't very successful at it, but we look at him as somebody we respect. An election system provider, I like to call it a provider, not a vendor, because a vendor fills soda machine with Coke. That's not what we're doing. We're providing a system to solve a problem, and that's what Thomas Edison was doing. So we try to look at it from a business perspective, from a market perspective, from a needs perspective. What do the customers need to fulfill their duty and to have successful elections in that jurisdiction? Every jurisdiction is different. Every state is different. So we start at the highest level, of course, meet the requirements of the Election Assistance Commission, meet the EAC requirements, and then go to the states that have market, right, that are interested in buying at that time, right? It doesn't do you any good to build a system for a state, X state, that is not buying voting systems. So then go to states that are in the market to buy. What do they actually need? How far away is that purchase cycle? And try to build something that is the best in the market to meet their need. I think that's pretty much what every voting system provider, as far as voting equipment, right? Because there's a lot of different things in the voting ecosystem, right? There's voter registration, there's poll books, election management systems, et cetera. So I would say as far as voting system providers, that's the way in general we kind of look at it.
Have you had any, I mean, we could go really far back, but I'm just curious, after the 2020 election, have you seen a shift in the way that when your customers are states and counties, that they're asking more or from different things from you than they have in the past?
No, for sure. I mean, it's changed drastically. So I've been doing this 21 years now. So I've seen a lot of change. You know, there was, you know, I would say in the early years when HAVA, of course, came. Now our system, like, it just happened to be in the right place in the right time, because we really built it for early voting. And our first system was a DRE, so it was, you know, it was great for early voting. And DREs were really great for election management, right? As far as election management.
Can you define what a DRE is?
DRE is direct record electronic, so no paper trail, basically. Even the first DREs were. So they were great for election managers. Election managers loved them. A lot of them now are having a hard time letting go of that concept. But, you know, voters, you know, told everybody, hey, we want a paper trail, we want paper in hand. So that's one of the big changes that happened. And, you know, it's kind of ironic, but we literally, as a business, have had to tell our customers, no, you've got to get over the DRE. It's not happening. We're not selling those anymore, you know, basically. That it's time for you to move on to paper because that's what America wants. So that's an example of a change. I'd say people are way more savvy about their purchases. I mean, just like a lot of other things we buy, right? People are just way more savvy, ask better questions, ask other jurisdictions before they just rush out and buy. People check your background, right? They check your references. They're at the beginning, I would say, I guess, like I maybe already said, HAVA years, there was like a, you know, gold rush to buy voting systems. It was this, you know, free money from the federal government without a lot necessarily a kick in the tires and thought into it sometimes. Not that there wasn't, you know, there wasn't for everybody, but some of the times that's how it was. So hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does.
Hello, I'm Eric Fay, Director of Elections in St. Louis County, Missouri, and you're listening to High Turnout, Wide Margins, a podcast where we explore local election administration.
I'm acknowledging that you are one of many equipment, so this is from your perspective, but you mentioned that you've acknowledged, Hart has acknowledged that DREs are not coming back, and that we've moved to a more paper-based system. That, I assume, is based on, you know, larger forces than your customers coming to you and saying, hey, we've now decided that we want paper. So what drives a lot of the thought process of, okay, well, now we're working on the next round of equipment, or now we're trying to make improvements to it? What kind of considerations are taken in when those decisions are being made? Yeah,
it's huge. I mean, it's forward thinking, right? How innovative can you be? You can't be real innovative in this market, unfortunately, right? Because you've got to build something people are going to buy. And what are people going to buy? They're going to buy things that meet the standards. I mean, you have to meet the standards. So what standards are there? What are the next standards? What standards do you build to? What standards are going to be in the RFPs, the request for proposals, that means, the RFPs that come out, and from the decision makers in those jurisdictions across the country. So that's really what decides what you build. So you can't do, you know, if you build it, they will come, because you will go bankrupt if you do that. So you have to do what are the requirements. How can I best meet those requirements? What do people want? And can I build that for a low enough cost to meet the need of that potential customer and be able to sell it and be able to keep my business profitable.
Pete, you talked a little bit about the challenge of developing a new voting system, and that's one thing I've noticed in my time being an election administrator is you'll have somebody from the public or maybe a state legislator who has an IT background. I used air quotes there, and they'll say, and they'll see some challenge we face. Say, oh, there's Apple has this, Microsoft this, whatever the case may be. But like you said, you just can't see a problem with something in the election system and then develop a solution for it the next day. There's this whole process. Can you, maybe to the uninitiated, or probably to a lot of election administrators as well, can you describe kind of from the corporate side, what does it take to bring not just a new system, but just even a fix to the existing system?
Yeah, it's hard. Let's just say it that way. It's hard. And the other thing I didn't even really talk about is there's also accessibility all along the way. A big thing you have to look at, and bad on me for not saying it earlier, actually, is accessibility, because accessibility is also a huge part of any solution you're going to run out there. Yeah, so building a system, what are the requirements? How do we build to those requirements? And then what is the design of the thing, and how do we best design it for usability for everybody, and especially for people with disabilities? How is it going to be stored? How the batteries are going to work? The battery's got to last this long. How are you going to charge the batteries? Are you going to charge the batteries? I mean, there's just all that stuff. How heavy is it going to be? How are you going to do if some jurisdictions do curbside voting? How are you going to do curbside voting? How are you going to put on wheels? You're going to fly it out there? How are you going to do all this stuff that the end user has to do? Then once you've determined that from design, you got to go out and double check, right? So you got to find customers and say, hey, don't tell anybody, but this is the thing we're thinking about doing next. What do you think? And they're going to say, oh, I love that, and I hate that. And you're like, what? You hate that? Oh, we thought you'd love that. No, you got to go back and talk to other customers, make sure everybody hates that, and then you have to maybe redesign that part because everybody turns out hates it. Then after you've done all that and decided, okay, this is the thing we want to build, you got to find your suppliers, find out how much it's going to cost to do all those things. Can it even be done? Do your tooling, make prototypes, go through and start at the federal level, getting certified. Once you've got the product, have it, you can build it, it's certified, then you need to go to states and say, okay, here it is, here's the next best piece of sliced bread, and will you certify it? And somewhere in there, depending on the state, you can start selling in that state. In some states, you cannot start selling until it's actually certified. So you've taken this huge risk. It's taken 2 years, right, to do all that stuff I just said, and then you can start selling. And at that point, you're like, wow, I hope I built the right thing, because now I got to pay for all that stuff I just did, which is millions of dollars to do all that. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, I'd say.
Given all that, do you think that that's a good process? Do you think that it should work that way?
Since I don't know a better way or a different way, I'm not sure that I can really opine on that. But I do, having seen other software systems that did not have guardrails, right? They didn't have the kiddie rails in the bowling alley, which is certification basically. I would say having certification gives a nice structure for things actually. Yeah, it's unfortunate. It cannot be, we can't be faster because of the certification requirements, but I also think the guardrails of certification help because they set standards that must be met and processes that must be followed.
So it's a highly regulated industry. It takes a lot of investment and time to get through this certification process and due diligence. But then there's only a fixed amount of customers.
That's right.
There's only so many states and counties in the United States.
3,600 or something. Yeah, it's a very small market.
And that's it. And
Yep.
So
And people want their equipment to last a long time, so it's
That's
not
right.
even like we're all buying at the same time.
That's right.
Right.
Yep.
So you don't see companies like Apple or Samsung or whatever developing voting systems, probably by and large for that reason. So how can the United States, how can we maintain a viable private market that's competitive where counties and states have, real options to choose from when it's such a constrained and regulated process?
It is a challenge. Right now, there are probably, half a dozen voting system companies in the United States, 3 that are really the top sellers, the top brands. I don't know how long that's sustainable. Right now, it is fairly sustainable. It is, an open market. I think in the best cases, the way it works is the best solution wins. And that's how it ought to work. And there's nothing wrong with that. The best solution wins. That's a good way to do things. The first over the finish line, that maybe isn't always the best way to do things, right? Because the jurisdictions want and deserve, and voters deserve to have choices. And I think there's a lot to be said for voting system companies showing that they're a good company. It's not just about the product, it's about the company. It's about having integrity. It's about having people, like me, who are going to stick around there for a long time because we believe in what we do. And I would say every voting system company, by the way, we feel like we are helping America to be a democracy, to be a democratic republic, to be the best we can be at providing successful elections where the winner won and a recount is going to turn out the same way the original count turned out.
So what is it like? We as election officials have voters that are unhappy, have people that voice concerns and things like that. What is it like to be one of the companies that gets hit with some of this ire on a national level? Does that, because I assume that nobody is calling you all directly. Nobody's calling like the corporate offices, and maybe they are, but what does that look like from the company's perspective?
It's hard. First, I'll say it's hard, just like it's hard for y'all. We try to take the perspective of where I first started, I guess, this conversation of customer success, that we want our customers to be successful, and that we have our customers back. So we do actually get direct calls, mostly from journalists, and we try to actually be helpful with journalists, but we do check their background and make sure they're actually a journalist, right? And we talk to journalists because we want journalists to be informed. If it's just irate voters, I shouldn't say just, if it's an irate voter, we check with that jurisdiction the voter is calling from, if we can figure that out, and we try to let the jurisdiction know about that because we don't feel like that's our place or appropriate. That's for the customer to deal directly, and we'll help them with that. And then for the rest of it, it's customers coming to us and saying, hey, there's this article out there that says these things, and can you help us respond to that? Or we have a voter asking these questions, can you help us respond to that? And we do, right? We've gone to forums to try to help in person at forums to try to educate the public, because that's what we have to do. No matter how tough the road is to do that, you've got to try to do that, because if you don't educate the public, I'm preaching to the choir here, but if you don't educate the public about, no, that's not a fact, right? That's an opinion that you're saying, and you're regurgitating things that aren't true. Here's the truth. If you don't just constantly do broken record on that, then you never get the truth out there. So we try to help our customers get the truth out there.
Kind of the last question I had is, what do you wish, like the public writ large, understood about the private industry of elections?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really just such a simple thing. I wish people understood that the folks who work for election voting system companies, election providers, we all believe we're doing the right thing. We all believe we are doing a good deed. You know, I was a teacher before. I felt like I was doing a good thing, right? Teaching kids and helping families. We feel like we're helping voters and we're helping jurisdictions across America. And, you know, the folks who attack the private sector, who say, you know, we're hacking or we're allowing hacking or we're flipping votes or whatever, it's like, that doesn't make sense. We're in a business to sell equipment that works. And the thing it's supposed to do is count votes and then report on the correct count of those votes to the public, you, so that you can know who you picked as your leaders. Why would we do anything to sabotage our own business that's not in line with that? So I think that's the gist of it.
You've been listening to High Turnout, Wide Margins, a podcast that explores local election administration. I'm your host, Brianna Lennon, alongside Eric Fay. Thanks to KBAA for making this podcast possible. Our managing editor is Rebecca Smith. Our managing producer is Aaron Hay, and our associate producers are Abigail Ruman and Katie Quinn. This has been High Turnout, Wide Margins. Thanks for listening.